This story is about a guy named Takemichi, being unemployed and living in a rented apartment. He learns on the news that his ex-girlfriend dies because of a Tokyo gang. After that, someone pushes him at a train station, and he makes a time jump back 12 years, where he lived as an ordinary schoolboy. There he meets his high school friends, and where they decide to beat and teach 8th graders from another school a lesson, but end up getting beaten up by high school students from that school themselves, and become members of the Tokyo gang. After that, he meets the younger brother of his ex-girlfriend named Naoto, and warns him about an incident in the future. By shaking hands with Takemichi, they go back to the present where Naoto becomes a police officer, but fails to prevent his sister's death. He asks Takemichi to jump back in time to prevent active gang leaders Manjiro Seino and Tadakasaki from meeting. By shaking hands, he goes back in time when he fights and gets beaten for losing more money. Next day, the money fight starts again, which his friend Takuya should have participated in, but because of weak heel, Takemichi decides to interrupt the fight to protect his friend, and stands up to Kiyomashi, the organizer of the fight, hoping to meet their leader Mikey. But he gets beaten up again, and Takemichi gets up the courage to continue the fight, but this time the fight is interrupted by Ken Raikujiaka Draken, the deputy leader of the Tokyo gang, and the leader Manjiro Seino himself. He says goodbye to Takemichi, telling him they will meet again, and the next day Manjiro Akamiki and Draken meet Takemichi. Takemichi's girlfriend Hinata Tachibana slaps Mikey in the face, telling him that every time when Takemichi messes with them he gets beaten. Takemichi becomes angry, and threatens him not to touch her. Mikey takes it as a joke, and assures him that he would never slap a girl. Mikey, Draken, and Takemichi then ride their bikes, and Takemichi asks Mikey why he likes him so much. He answers that he reminds him of his brother who died 10 years ago. So Mikey decides to create a new era of hooliganism, where only decent hooligans exist, and invites Takemichi to join him. After that, Takemichi unknowingly meets the second future leader of the gang, Tadakasaki. Takemichi accidentally takes Naoto's hand thinking it's Hinata's and returns to the present. Takemichi and Naoto decide to meet Mikey to find out what changed his gang, but Mikey leaves no trace, so they decide to contact Akin first, Takemichi's old friend. They meet, and Akin confesses that it was he who pushed Takemichi out of the way, and that it was Naoto who saved him. Akin asks if he has supernatural powers to travel through time. Takemichi cannot believe what he heard and believes that his friend would never do that. Akin confesses that he is a slave of Tadakasaki, and that now everyone in the gang is under his control. Akin confesses that Mikey has changed a great deal since the death of his best friend Draken, and that he should not have died like that. At which point Akin jumps off the roof one last time, asking Takemichi to return to the past and save all his friends. Takemichi and Naoto find out from an old newspaper that 12 years ago Mikey and Draken had an argument, as a result of which Draken was stabbed in the stomach and died. Takemichi decides to save Draken and goes back in time, where Draken immediately asks him to meet him at the temple. It turns out that the whole Taza is planning a meeting, and at it, they discuss the situation with another criminal group that crossed their path, Mobius. Their leader raped and hanged the whole family of one of Mikey's friends, Heishida, named Pachin. Mikey asks if they should go to fight, to which Pachin agrees. Takemichi decides to become Draken's assistant, but he refuses, and Takemichi decides to follow him. While following him, he sees Draken and Mikey arguing several times, but not to a big quarrel. Takemichi follows them to City Hospital, where Mikey and Draken see Pachin's friend's girlfriend lying in a coma. The parents of the girl walk up to them, and in desperation the father insults them, but in tears, asks them never to show their faces again, and accuses them of mutilating their daughter. Draken tells Mikey that it is not necessary to involve innocent people in the quarrel between them and Mobius. Takemichi learns that Draken is Mikey's heart, and he makes up for all the qualities Mikey lacks. Takemichi decides to find out more about Mobius. Meanwhile, Draken tells about his life. He was born in the red light district. He never had a father, and his mother was a prostitute. His home is a massage parlor with special services. He spent all his childhood in fights with high school kids, but one day they beat him up, and gave him an assignment to bring Mikey, who at that time was famous for beating up another gang leader. Draken decides to meet him and fight first, and then bring him to the bullies. He meets him, and asks him to go and meet those bullies. However, with a single leg kick, Mikey swipes at their leader to show his dominance over them. The others run away scared, and Mikey and Draken become best friends ever since. Meanwhile, at this point, Takemichi and Naoto try to get in touch with Asanai. He confesses that Mobius was the reason for the split in Taza. But Takemichi and Naoto conclude that someone wanted to provoke Mikey and Draken, but they cannot figure out who and why. Takemichi goes back in time to prevent a fight between Mobius and Tokyo Gang. They decide to tell Mikey about it. Takemichi goes back in time and convinces Mikey not to fight Mobius, but he refuses. At that time Asanai himself and the whole Mobius gang comes to them. Takemichi does not recognize Asanai sattering at him, then provokes him to punch him right in the face. Pachin turns Asanai on himself and starts to fight him, to which Mikey tells Takemichi not to interfere and silently watches. Mikey knocks out Mobius's leader with a single kick, but Asanai doesn't give up and runs at Mikey with a sharp object in his hands, but Draken prevents and stops Asanai, thus joining Mobius to the Tokyo Gang. Meanwhile, someone has called the police, and they are already heading straight for the show. However, Pachin cannot forgive Asanai and stabs him in the back and wants to surrender. While escaping, Takemichi loses consciousness and is taken to hospital. A few hours later, he wakes up and learns from Draken's girlfriend Emma that Draken and Mikey had a big fight after being released from the hospital. Takemichi meets his friends at home, where Draken suddenly announces that their gang is over and meets Mikey on the street. Takemichi avoids the conflict and agrees to go to the festival together with Hina. During the festival, his friend calls him and warns about the danger aimed at Draken. Takemichi decides to find Draken, but finds Kiyomashi, the organizer of the fights, who decides to kill Draken due to the fact that he ruined his life. The Kiyomashi gang catch Takemichi following them and beat him. After a while, he is found by Hina and frees. On the way, he meets Mitsaya, and he tells him about Kiyomashi's plans to kill Draken. But Mitsaya thinks that it was Pian who could not come to terms with Pachin's imprisonment in prison. They eventually go to save Draken. Meanwhile, Draken is attacked, and to help him, Mikey himself is in a hurry. It turns out that someone deliberately set up this fight. It turned out that it was the second commander of the Mobius group detachment, Hanma, who declares that he wants to destroy Tosta, 100 people of the Mobius gang against 4 people. But at this time the rest of Tosta come and a real carnage begins. Takemichi looks for Draken to prevent the murder. However, Draken is already stabbed. Mikey wants to approach Draken, but he and Hanma interferes and they start to fight. Takemichi decides to save Draken himself and carries him on his back to the hospital. Then Kiyomashi and his guys interfere with him on the way. Kiyomashi pierces his palm with a knife, but he does not give up and fights, and eventually strangles him. However, the other guys do not give up and decide to end Takemichi once and for all. At this time, Takemichi's friends come to the rescue and fight to the last with the Kiyomashi gang. Ambulance comes to the call and takes Draken and the others to the hospital. Meanwhile, the fight between the Tokyo gang and Mobius stopped and everyone fled. But Hanma threatened Mikey that another criminal group called Valhalla would not leave Tosa alone, and leaves. At this moment, Draken is on the verge between life and death. But the doctors manage to take him to the hospital and start the operation. Mikey and the rest of the guys arrive in time for the hospital and wait until the operation is over. The doctors come out and reassure everyone, saying that Draken's life is out of danger. Everyone is happy and runs out to tell the others. Mikey rejoices and cries with joy and fear for the life of his best friend. A few days pass and Draken is recovering. Mikey, through Draken, gives Takemichi his old gang form as a token of gratitude for saving the life of a friend, and wonders how Takemichi found out that an attack was being prepared on Draken and who was behind it. Takemichi returns to the present and discovers that Hinata is alive, then meets his friend Akin safe as a working hairdresser. Unexpectedly, Naoto calls him and informs him that his sister is alive and they need to meet her. Having met, they decided to talk heart to heart, and during a walk in the park, Takemichi meets Hanma, who tells him that he was supposed to be in the car. Meanwhile, Hina was in the car, and Akin, driving a truck, rams the car in which Hina is sitting. The events repeat, and Akin asks Takemichi to save him again. But Hina fails to save, and the car is together with the truck explode.